No one wakes up on an ordinary day expecting that history is being rewritten before their very eyes. There are no sirens, bombs, or trenches. But something has changed, subtle, almost imperceptible, like a silent crack running through the structure of the world. Agreements fall apart, speeches take on a sharper tone, and political decisions echo like the movement of pieces on an invisible chessboard. Instead of tanks, the attacks are digital. Instead of missiles, there are economic embargoes and sabotage no one claims responsibility for. War, it seems, did not begin with a bang, but with a calculated silence. On the surface, everything still looks like peace, but beneath the skin of the world, there are clear signs of an ongoing global conflict. A conflict involving powers like Russia, China, the US, Iran, Israel, NATO, and Ukraine, all playing their own games while the global population watches, distracted, a carefully scripted spectacle of disinformation. And what if what we call isolated conflicts are actually scattered chapters of a new war? Not one declared through official statements, but one that infiltrates power grids, markets, food systems, and lines of code. Could it be that we are already living through World War III and simply haven't been informed? Welcome to another night where mysteries never sleep. I'm Midnight, and this is 7 Nights. Before we begin, I'd like to ask for your help. Like the video, comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's just one click, but it makes a huge difference in helping YouTube deliver the videos to more people and in allowing me to continue bringing this content to you. I'm counting on you. Let's get to the video. Have you ever heard of a war that starts without a single shot? No marching troops, no sirens cutting through the sky. That's exactly how everything seems to have begun. In December 2015, in the heart of Ukraine, a significant part of the power grid simply went dark. A digital attack took substations offline and left hundreds of thousands of people in the dark. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a failure. It was a planned attack, traced to a group known as Sandworm, linked to the Russian intelligence service. But no one claimed it, and no one reacted as if it were an act of war. Perhaps because, at first glance, it didn't seem like war. It looked more like a warning, a demonstration of what could be done, without leaving the keyboard. What few realized is that the blackout wasn't the end of the action, it was just the rehearsal. 2 years later, the world saw something even bolder. The NotPetya virus, which started in Ukraine and hit companies on a global scale. Maersk, FedEx, energy and logistics giants, all were affected. Trillions moved, systems stopped. And again, no one declared war. Does that already seem strange to you? Because all of this points to something much deeper. What would happen if an entire war could be fought without anyone officially knowing it's happening? That's exactly where this theory gains strength. Cyber attacks are the new artillery. They enter, strike, test, and disappear. They leave no smoke, no crater. Only digital traces that are not always clear, and often deliberately ambiguous. And it's not just direct attacks. It's control. Between 2018 and 2022, the world saw a rise in trade tensions between the planet's largest powers. The United States and China, once strategic partners, began waging a silent war for technological dominance. The Huawei blockade, sanctions against chip manufacturers, the 5G race. But instead of bombs, what we saw were commercial decisions, diplomatic restrictions, and economic espionage, all hidden under the cloak of national security. Meanwhile, backstage movements continued to grow. Russia, quietly, increased its presence in the Arctic. NATO weakened, saw its own members questioning mutual loyalty. In places like Syria and Crimea, local conflicts masked much larger interests. And no one called it a global war. But if almost all major powers are involved, directly or indirectly, what more is needed for this conflict to be named? During the pandemic, a new kind of control emerged, not just sanitary, but also strategic. While governments focused on fighting the virus, other players moved. Tech companies gained powers never seen before. Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Palantir, all began interacting directly with states. The line between corporate and state power became blurred. Who is in control now? And to whom do these new powers owe allegiance? In parallel, a series of strange events began to occur. Explosions in gas pipelines, fires in electronics component factories, simultaneous failures in transportation systems. In other times, these events would be considered sabotage. Today, they're treated as investigated accidents. But what if, in truth, they're part of a larger strategy? A war where the goal is not to win a battle, but to break the enemy's economic resistance? And then comes an even more sinister detail. Almost all of this goes unnoticed. The press covers it, but treats it as isolated events. The public, distracted by political scandals, entertainment, and polarization, doesn't connect the dots. But those who take a step back, those who observe the full picture, start to see the pattern. And that pattern doesn't point to peace. It points to conflict, a continuous, orchestrated, and faceless conflict. This war isn't one with raised flags or military parades. It's one with silence, with patience, and with infiltration. The enemy doesn't need to take territory, he just needs to weaken you from within. Sabotage your economy, fragment your society, corrupt your trust in institutions. And when you finally realize what's happening, it might already be too late. At this point, you might be wondering, but how is it possible for a war like this to exist without anyone noticing? The truth is, it depends exactly on that. Being invisible is its greatest strength. Being denied is its greatest protection. And what if the greatest war of our time is precisely the one no one dares to acknowledge? Imagine a war zone where there is no blood, no ruins, yet thousands are wounded every day from the inside. The modern battlefield isn't in deserts or mountains. It's in your pocket, on your phone screen, in what you read, share, and comment on. That's where one of the most silent and dangerous fronts of the invisible war is being fought. The front of information. Or more precisely, disinformation. In 2016, during the US elections, reports from the CIA and FBI confirmed something alarming. Foreign powers had directly interfered in the United States political discourse. The method? Creating fake profiles, promoting distorted news, manipulating algorithms to divide the population. The goal wasn't to elect someone. It was to weaken the people's trust in their own institutions. And to some extent, it worked. This technique wasn't an isolated case. It repeated in several nations in the following years: Brazil, Germany, the United Kingdom, India. The logic was simple: create chaos from within. There's no need to launch a missile when you can turn society against itself. And the curious thing is that hardly anyone notices. The information is delivered directly to the feed, packaged as opinion, disguised as freedom of speech. But underneath it all, it's an operation. Social media companies became involuntary tools, or in some cases, accomplices of this new war. Algorithms that reward engagement began to favor the most extreme content. The more controversial, the greater the reach. And the greater the reach, the higher the potential for manipulation. In no time, millions of people were being guided by carefully constructed narratives meant to divide, weaken, and control. On top of that, an even harder to fight phenomenon emerged: deepfakes. Fake videos with real faces, cloned voices, and situations that never happened. In 2020, a fake video of the Ukrainian president calling for surrender circulated during the early months of the conflict with Russia. Though it was quickly debunked, the mere existence of the material showed the power of this new weapon. And what if next time the video is more convincing, or launched at a critical moment? While most people worry about fake news on WhatsApp, the real engineers of disinformation operate on much deeper levels. Entire platforms are created just to support false narratives. Seemingly harmless pages become hubs of radicalization. And by the time someone realizes they're surrounded by lies, they no longer know who to trust. This widespread doubt is one of the most dangerous effects. When everything seems manipulated, even the truth begins to look suspicious. And at that point, the information war fulfills its purpose: destabilization. The average citizen, unknowingly, becomes both a soldier and a target. They share, replicate, spread the narrative. And they do so believing they're helping, when in fact, they're feeding the machinery of a war they cannot see. Even traditional news outlets were affected. Trust in journalism plummeted in many parts of the world. Governments began using the term fake news to discredit any criticism. And what was once a tool to protect democracy became a weapon against it. Is it really a coincidence that this happened in so many countries at the same time? On the other side of the digital curtain, there are specialized groups operating with surgical precision. Some work for governments, others for corporations, and some act out of ideology or pure profit. The fact is, while you browse, they work. They select topics, manufacture outrage, plant doubt, and they do it with the cold precision of those who know exactly what they're doing. It's important to understand this isn't paranoia, it's strategy. NATO documents already recognize informational manipulation as a strategic component of modern warfare. The United States, China, Russia, and Iran all have specialized divisions for this type of operation. The battlefield isn't hypothetical. It already exists, and it's fully operational. If you think a war only begins when the first shots are fired, you might be seeing only the surface. The new generation of soldiers doesn't carry rifles. They carry flash drives, code, and connections. They don't appear on TV, but they can shut down a city with a few commands. And make no mistake, they've been in action for a long time. One of the first clear signs of this was the emergence of the Stuxnet virus. Developed by US and Israeli forces, it was designed to specifically target Iran's nuclear centrifuges. What once seemed like science fiction became reality. A silent code, hidden within industrial systems, capable of sabotage without leaving a visible trace. It was a demonstration of power. A message: war had changed form. Since then, digital attacks have multiplied. In 2021, a group called DarkSide infiltrated the network of Colonial Pipeline in the US. It was like pressing a button and freezing much of the fuel supply on the East Coast. The impact was immediate: lines, panic, losses. And all of it with a simple ransomware. What if the same technique were used against hospital or nuclear systems? These attacks have signatures, but rarely come with names. Groups like Lazarus, APT-29, and Hafnium act under unknown flags, linked to governments that deny any involvement. And that's the game. Denial is part of the strategy. It allows them to attack again. It allows them to test boundaries. While the other side is still trying to figure out what happened, the damage is already done. These agents don't come through the front door. They infiltrate companies, universities, government systems. They stay there for weeks, months, sometimes years, watching, collecting, and when necessary, they act. Have you ever stopped to think how long it might take before their presence is detected? And once they are detected, what has already been taken? And it's not just about data. Modern espionage is about power. Whoever controls the information controls the decisions. In 2020, when the world discovered that 18,000 companies had been affected by the SolarWinds platform attack, the scale of the risk became clear. Entire departments of the US government were exposed. The origin? Once again, all signs pointed to Russian intelligence. But who really knows? But there's more. Today, it's not enough to collect. You must manipulate. Information is stolen, but also edited, planted, released at the right moment to create impact. Scandals, crises, strategic disinformation. All of it can be programmed in advance. This is no longer just espionage. It's perception engineering. These invisible soldiers know exactly what they're doing. While the eyes of the world are focused on headlines, they operate far from the cameras. They move behind the scenes. They rewrite the terms of war without needing a single explosion. How many important decisions do you think were influenced by information that was only there because someone put it there? And meanwhile, digital defenses lag behind. Companies and governments race to reinforce their systems, but it always feels like they're reacting too late. With each new attack, the stakes rise. The tools evolve. The methods become more sophisticated. The war advances without needing territory. All it takes is access. Today, those who master the code control the backstage of the world. And if armies are no longer on the battlefield, who's really deciding the future of war? History has already shown, whoever controls energy controls the world. But in this silent war, energy control doesn't come through invasions or armies marching over oil fields. It comes through surgical sabotage, well-calculated attacks, and geopolitical decisions made behind closed doors. And every move on this board is costly, for countries and for you, as you feel the direct impact on your energy bill and supermarket shelves. In 2022, one of the strangest and most symbolic episodes of this war occurred: the explosions on the Nord Stream pipeline in the Baltic Sea. This pipeline connected Russia to Western Europe, especially Germany, and was a central piece of Europe's energy policy. Overnight, the pipeline was destroyed. No one claimed responsibility. Multiple theories emerged: Russian sabotage? American operation? Interference from an unknown third party? The truth is, to this day, the world has only questions and no clear answers. And it wasn't an isolated case. The war in Ukraine exposed how energy supply can be used as a weapon. During the coldest months, the entire continent of Europe had to reorganize itself to avoid energy collapse. Countries that once depended on Russian gas scrambled for alternatives, while Moscow reduced supply, directly affecting entire economies. Energy ceased to be a service and became ammunition. The same logic is spreading to other regions. In the Middle East, attacks on Saudi oil facilities in 2019 caused a 5% drop in global oil production in just one day. The perpetrators? Houthi rebels from Yemen, armed with drones, allegedly backed by Iran. But would a rebel group have access to such precise technology? Or was someone bigger behind it, using chaos as a smokescreen? And here's a detail few talk about. Electrical power is also being targeted. In 2022, the U.S. suffered coordinated attacks against power substations in states like North Carolina and Washington. Investigations pointed to extremist groups, but many analysts suspect something more. After all, who would be interested in quietly testing the resilience of America's energy grid? Renewable energy, once seen as the solution, has also become a target. Solar installations and wind farms have been sabotaged in some regions of Europe in recent years. Although the cases were treated as vandalism or accidents, there are signs of coordination. Is someone trying to slow the energy transition to maintain dominance over fossil resources? Meanwhile, countries are beginning to form silent energy alliances. China and Russia invest in alternative routes for gas and oil. Iran and Venezuela strengthen ties with Asian powers. And the West tries to hold the reins with new sources of lithium, uranium, and even green hydrogen. But beneath this dispute lies something deeper, a war for energy autonomy. This struggle directly influences political decisions. Those who depend on imported energy also depend on fragile agreements, unstable leadership, and markets that can be manipulated. And if a simple sanction can paralyze an entire country, we're not just talking about economics. We're talking about domination. Even sabotage disguised as industrial accidents has become more common. Refinery explosions, failures in distribution networks, mysterious fires in storage centers. In a world where energy is power, these occurrences stop being coincidences. They are moves. What few people realize is that in this scenario, everyone is vulnerable. Every outlet, every fuel pump, every light bulb, all depend on a complex supply chain. And what if someone is pulling the strings behind it all? When we talk about war, almost no one thinks about food. But what if an empty plate is actually a carefully positioned weapon? Over the past few years, entire harvests have vanished under accidental fires, grain stockpiles have rotted while trapped behind borders, and fertilizers have disappeared from the market without a convincing explanation. Hunger today may not be a consequence, but part of the strategy. During the war between Russia and Ukraine, a global alarm went off. Both countries are responsible for a massive share of wheat, corn, and barley exports. When Ukrainian ports were blocked, the impact wasn't limited to Europe. From the Middle East to Africa, prices skyrocketed, shelves began to empty, and political instability quietly grew in already fragile nations. The food crisis wasn't just a side effect, it was a planned chain reaction. At the same time, fertilizers became the center of a silent dispute. Russia, Belarus, and China drastically reduced exports of these inputs, which are essential for global agribusiness. Less fertilizer means lower production. Lower production means more scarcity. And with scarcity, chaos begins to spread. Was this merely a response to sanctions, or part of a larger movement to test nations' food resilience? And it doesn't stop there. More than 20 fires hit food processing facilities in the United States in just over a year. Most of the cases were treated as accidental, but the frequency caught the attention of experts and fueled independent investigations. Accidents happen, of course, but when they occur in succession, in strategic locations, and without consistent public explanations, the doubt ceases to be paranoia. Meanwhile, tech giants began acquiring companies that control seeds, climate regulation, and agricultural distribution. Food became increasingly controlled by automated systems, crop data, and market forecasts generated by artificial intelligence. Whoever controls these systems controls the timing and pace of global production. Have you ever asked yourself who owns these technologies? And when food is controlled, so is social response. Hungry populations protest. Pressured governments make impulsive decisions. Tension grows. In some cases, regimes fall. Not by bombs, but by the absence of rice, bread, or fuel to deliver goods. In this war, the enemy can use hunger to bend nations without firing a single shot. In Africa, parts of Asia, and even Latin America, the number of people facing severe food insecurity has surged in recent years. In some countries, over 50% of the population relies on humanitarian aid. And instead of being resolved, this scenario seems to have been kept under minimal control, just enough to avoid total collapse, but to maintain instability. Who would benefit from a planet in constant food tension? The global food supply chain is extremely vulnerable. A single disruption in maritime transport, a crop failure in a key region, or a poorly calculated sanction can trigger a domino effect. And these failures don't need to be natural. They can be provoked, amplified, and sustained under economic, climate, or health-related justifications. In 2023, reports of sabotage in strategic warehouses, mysteriously contaminated crops, and even temporary disappearances of international shipments began to circulate more widely. Although many of these cases haven't been officially confirmed, the repetition of patterns raises the question: is it possible to manipulate global hunger in a coordinated way? Modern military manuals already recognize food security as a strategic issue. It's not an exaggeration. Food has become a weapon. But unlike other wars, in this one, the targets aren't soldiers, they're civilians. And the shots make no sound. Whenever a war begins, the question few people ask is, who really benefits? Because while most struggle to survive, there is always someone counting the profits. In the case of the invisible Third World War, that question is even more urgent and harder to answer. But some clues start to appear when we follow the trail of money, power, and discrete movements that escape public view. Over the past few years, companies in technology, defense, and energy have posted record profits. While governments slashed budgets and populations battled inflation, these sectors surged. What do these companies have in common? All of them are directly or indirectly involved in the pillars of modern warfare: data, infrastructure, and narrative control. Some names are already known to the public. Palantir, for example, develops data analysis systems for governments and armed forces. Its growth coincided with the rise in global tensions and the use of artificial intelligence in military operations. What's curious is that the more unstable the world becomes, the more these companies grow. Is that just coincidence? The defense sector also quietly gains strength. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and Northrop Grumman signed multi-billion-dollar contracts over the past 3 years. The official reason? Strategic security maintenance. But there's more to it. Many of these contracts involve technologies that aren't being used in declared wars. Could they be deployed in the invisible operations we've been discussing? And what about the financial sector? Banks and investment funds that bet on energy, food, and defense tech saw their assets increase in value precisely during moments of greatest instability. When there's crisis, there's movement. And when there's movement, those at the top of the financial system usually win, whether with oil, data, or fear. It's not an exaggeration to say that some institutions seem to thrive in chaos. But that raises an uncomfortable question. Is there an interest in maintaining instability? If the invisible war feeds profits for certain sectors, what incentive do these forces have to restore order? Even some governments appear to operate under similar logic. Constant tension justifies surveillance measures, rising military budgets, and a narrative of external enemies that keeps populations under control. In the name of security, rights are redefined. And the more invisible the enemy, the broader the power granted to those who promise protection. Multilateral organizations, once seen as pillars of balance, now seem paralyzed or fragmented. The UN, the IMF, and the G7 face internal crises, diplomatic deadlocks, and growing public distrust. This opens space for informal alliances, off-the-record deals, and a reshuffling of global power that favors unelected actors, corporations, private consortia, and entities no one oversees. This isn't a movie conspiracy. These are real, documented structures operating in their own interest. Structures that may not have created the war, but have learned how to profit from it. And when profit becomes routine, any crisis can turn into opportunity. World War III might not be a future event. Perhaps it's already happening, just in such a fragmented, silent, and strategic way that few can see the full picture. It doesn't look like the wars we know. It has no clear borders, no obvious winners. Its battlefields are invisible, and its effects hide in everyday life. In inflation, in blackouts, in digital polarization, in the empty shelves at the store. Every attack is denied, every move camouflaged. But the impact is there, visible to anyone who chooses to look. This story is just one piece, and one day, you might see the whole puzzle. If this made you think, subscribe and like the video. It helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share it. After all, more voices mean more discoveries.